The first confirmed record of interstellar insurance did not begin with a treaty, a market, or a financial summit. It began with a fire. Chapter 1. The Warehouse District. On the colony world of Rithais, disasters were permanent. That was not philosophy. It was accounting. Governor Selen Vey stood behind the polarized glass of the emergency command room and watched the eastern warehouse district burn. Fire suppression drones moved through the smoke in disciplined spirals, releasing curtains of white foam that vanished orange beneath the flames. The district had been built in the colony's second decade, before Rithais had enough money for redundancies, and before anyone admitted that temporary construction had a way of becoming permanent. Warehouse Complex 8 occupied nearly 6 hectares beside the old freight canal. It held machine shops, food importers, tool merchants, medical suppliers, agricultural brokers, and a family business that manufactured the tiny seals used in atmospheric pumps. At sunrise, 42 businesses had existed there. By noon, none of them did. Status, Selen said. Economic Minister Joran Hale did not look up from his tablet. Evacuation was successful. 11 injuries, 2 serious, both stable, no confirmed fatalities. Selen let out the breath he had been holding. The fire crews. Rotating. Human volunteers from the southern district arrived 20 minutes ago. That gave Selen pause. Volunteers. Apparently. Why? Joran looked up. I did ask. And? They said the professional crews looked tired. Selen watched a human in a yellow coat drag a hose line through water deep enough to cover his boots. Another human guided 3 local responders away from a buckling wall. Their equipment did not match. Some wore municipal gear. Some wore industrial helmets. One had arrived in the delivery truck he was now using to tow a damaged suppression unit. Humans had been on Rithais for 4 years. Selen had stopped asking why they did certain things. Usually the property loss, he asked. Joran's expression tightened. Total. All of it. The main frame has failed. The west section may remain standing, but the interior temperatures exceeded equipment tolerance. The cargo. Destroyed. The records. Some cloud backups, not all. And the businesses. Joran looked back at the numbers. 42 insolvencies are likely within the week. Selen turned from the window. 42. They have no revenue, no equipment, and no inventory. Their existing debts remain. Their employees will require compensation. Their suppliers will demand payment. We have disaster relief funds. For public infrastructure. Use them. We can rebuild roads, power lines, and the freight connection. We cannot legally reimburse private loss. Selen knew that. He had signed the law himself. The restriction was considered prudent. Colonial governments that paid private losses became responsible for every bad harvest, every structural failure, every stolen shipment, and every ambitious merchant who confused risk with entitlement. Public money restored public systems. Private failure remained private. That was how every stable economy in the council worked. Selen looked through the glass again. The fire was beginning to darken. The silence afterward would be worse. The machines would stop. The workers would scatter. The surviving merchants would sell their homes to satisfy creditors. Within 6 months, the district would become an abandoned scar at the edge of the capital. It had happened on other colonies. It always happened. Disasters were expensive. Failure was forever. Down at street level, a human delivery driver parked beside the cordon and climbed out carrying 2 metal thermoses. He handed one to a firefighter. The other he carried to a merchant sitting on the curb. The merchant's name was Terk Mal. Selen knew him. Terk supplied industrial seals to half the atmospheric processors in the northern settlements. He had inherited the company from his mother, who had inherited it from hers. The human sat beside him. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Terk said, "I own that warehouse." The human looked toward the smoke. "I figured. My business is finished." "Maybe." "There is no maybe." "I said maybe." Terk laughed once without amusement. "You do not understand." "I probably don't. My machines were inside." "Yeah. My inventory. My records. That one's going to hurt. My contracts." The human nodded. "My future." The human unscrewed his thermos and blew across the drink. "Have you called your insurance company?" Terk frowned. "My what?" Chapter 2. The Strange Word. By sunset, the investigators had determined the cause. A 31-year-old power converter had suffered an internal fault. The fault ignited packing foam stacked too close to the wall. The first suppression nozzle failed. The second activated 6 seconds late. By then, fire had entered the overhead service channel and moved beyond the reach of the local system. No sabotage, no terrorism, no negligence severe enough to prosecute. Just age, heat, timing, and bad luck. Governor Selen hated reports like that. There was no enemy to punish, no official to dismiss, only arithmetic. The first reconstruction estimate reached his desk before evening meal. Estimated physical damage, 118 million credits. Estimated 5-year economic impact, 1.9 billion. Estimated permanent job loss, 612 positions. Estimated secondary business failures, between 17 and 34. Selen signed the emergency declaration. It authorized temporary shelter, road repair, power restoration, and medical assistance. It would not save a single business. His assistant appeared in the doorway. Governor. Yes. The human trade delegation has requested a meeting. They are offering aid. They are asking a question. What question? The assistant hesitated. They want to know why none of the merchants carried insurance. Selen stared at her. I heard that word earlier. So did I. What does it mean? The assistant consulted her tablet. The translation system offers several possibilities. Assurance. Guarantee, risk pledge, mutual protection contract. Which one? It marked all 4 as incomplete. The meeting began 12 minutes later. The human representative introduced herself without ceremony. My name is Rebecca Holt. No title, no insignia beyond a small silver pin shaped like the earth. She placed a thin folder on the table. What happened today was tragic. Selen nodded. It was. But it shouldn't become permanent. It already has. Rebecca frowned. Why? Because 42 businesses no longer exist. No. They do. No, she repeated gently. They lost buildings. They lost everything. Rebecca's expression shifted from sympathy to confusion. Were they uninsured? Selen folded his hands. We do not know what that means. For several seconds, Rebecca searched every face around the table. No one smiled. No one showed the slightest sign of humor. She sat back slowly. Oh. Another pause followed. Then she said, You really don't. No. Rebecca opened the folder. Inside was a list of the 42 businesses. Beside each name, she had written 3 columns: property, interruption, liability. Selen pointed. What are those? The things that should have kept today from destroying them. Kept the fire from happening. No, insurance doesn't stop the fire. Then it failed before it began. Rebecca shook her head. No, it stops the fire from becoming the end of someone's life. The economic minister leaned forward. How? By spreading the loss. Among whom? Everyone. Silence returned. Joran gave a careful, diplomatic smile. Representative Holt, the translator, may be failing. It is. You are suggesting that unrelated parties absorb the private loss of these merchants. Yes. Why would they agree? Because someday the loss might be theirs. The smile disappeared. You expect citizens to pay for disasters that have not happened. Yes. And may never happen. Yes. And if nothing happens, then they paid for protection they didn't use. Joran looked at Selen. Selen looked at Rebecca. Rebecca waited. Finally, Selen said, That is the most human idea I have ever heard. Rebecca smiled faintly. You haven't seen the paperwork yet. Chapter 3. Paying for nothing. The emergency assembly convened the next morning. 12 councilors attended in person. 43 joined by SecureLink. Representatives from the banking guild, trade houses, labor associations, and colonial development office filled the gallery. Rebecca stood at the center of the chamber beside a display screen. The first slide showed a house. The second showed the same house on fire. The third showed a family standing in front of a rebuilt house. Councilor Ivan Tal raised a hand. That sequence omits the mechanism. Yes, Rebecca said. That's the next slide. The next slide showed thousands of small dots flowing into a common pool. One dot left the pool and became a house. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Rebecca continued. Insurance begins with a group of people who face similar risks. Each pays a smaller, predictable amount into a shared system. Most will not suffer a major loss during any given year. A few will. The system uses the many small payments to cover the few large losses. Counselor Tell frowned. So the fortunate subsidize the careless. Sometimes. The chamber erupted. Rebecca waited. When the noise subsided, she added, they also subsidize the unlucky, the injured, the sick, the flooded, the robbed, the widowed, the stranded, and the people whose warehouse burned because a 31-year-old converter failed at exactly the wrong moment. That is sentiment, Tal said. No. It's risk pooling. You reward failure. We price risk. You remove consequences. We prevent consequences from multiplying. Economic Minister Joran Rose, explain. Rebecca changed the display. The image became a diagram of Warehouse Complex 8. The fire caused 118 million credits in direct damage. Without insurance, the 42 businesses fail. Their 600 employees lose income. Their creditors absorb defaults. Their suppliers lose contracts. Their customers face shortages. Tax revenue falls. Public assistance rises. The colony loses an estimated 1.9 billion credits over 5 years. She advanced the slide. The secondary failures vanished. With insurance, the physical loss remains 118 million. The businesses receive funds to replace equipment, cover temporary wages, relocate operations, and satisfy valid claims. Most reopen. Workers remain employed. Suppliers continue shipping. The colony still suffers a fire, but it does not suffer an economic amputation. A banker in the gallery stood. Who possesses sufficient capital to guarantee losses of that scale? An insurer. That is merely a bank with irrational obligations. Not exactly. What happens when several losses occur at once? Reinsurance. The translator paused, then produced insurance for insurance. The assembly fell quiet again. Rebecca nodded toward the display. Insurers spread risk among customers. Reinsurers spread risk among insurers. Governments regulate reserves, solvency, pricing, and claims practices. Actuaries model the probability and scale of future losses. Counselor Tal's brow tightened. Your civilization created a profession devoted to predicting accidents. Yes, and these individuals are respected. Not at parties. Several humans in the gallery laughed. No one else did. Rebecca continued. Insurance does not eliminate uncertainty. It turns catastrophic uncertainty into manageable cost. A labor representative stood. Why would an insurer pay? Once it possesses the contributions, denial would be more profitable. Rebecca's expression became more serious. That is why we regulate them. Because they attempt to avoid payment. Sometimes. Then the system is corrupt. Sometimes. The chamber stirred. Rebecca did not retreat. Human institutions are not built on the assumption that everyone behaves perfectly. They are built with audits, contracts, appeals, courts, reserve rules, disclosure requirements, penalties, and inspectors because we know they won't. Governor Selen watched the counselors absorb that. Many species built systems around trust. Humans built trust, then surrounded it with procedures for the day trust failed. It was less elegant. It was also harder to kill. Counselor Tal folded his arms. You admit fraud exists. Of course. Customers may lie. Yes. Companies may cheat. Yes. Governments may interfere. Yes. Then why preserve such a system? Rebecca looked toward the image of the burned warehouse. Because imperfect protection is better than perfect ruin. Chapter 4. The Claim. Terkmal did not attend the assembly. He spent the morning inside the remains of his business. The west wall still stood. The roof did not. He walked through black water and twisted steel, following the path that had once led from the receiving desk to the main production floor. His grandmother's first seal press lay beneath a collapsed beam. It had been obsolete for 20 years. They had kept it anyway. Terk knelt beside it and brushed ash from the manufacturer's plate. A voice behind him said, I'm going to need you not to move anything. Terk turned, A human woman stood near the entrance in a gray coat. She held a tablet, a camera, and a folding ruler. "Who are you?" "Mara Singh, claims adjuster." "I did not make a claim." "No, Governor Selen did." "He owns none of this." "Correct, he asked us to demonstrate the process. Participation is voluntary." Tarek looked at the wreckage. "Demonstrate what?" "How we figure out what it takes to put you back where you were." "You cannot." "No," Myra said. "But I can get closer than the fire left you." She stepped carefully around a melted workbench. "Tell me what this machine did." "It cut pressure seals." "Modeled." "Vaskin 4. Age?" 11 years. "Replacement cost?" "I do not know. The manufacturer merged with Olin Industrial." Mara entered the information. "Production capacity: 20,000 units per cycle. Average operating schedule: 2 shifts. Maintenance history: stored in the office server. Cloud backup: partial. Supplier invoices: some. Tax filings: yes. Payroll: yes. Photographs." Tarek stared at her. "Of the machine." "Of the facility, company announcements, employee pictures, training recordings, anything that shows equipment, layout, inventory, or condition." Tarek thought of the annual apprentice photograph. Every year, his employees gathered on the production floor beneath the company emblem. They complained about the lighting. Someone always blinked. "We have photographs." "Good, they may help establish what was here." Mara moved deeper into the building. She photographed serial plates, machine mounts, inventory racks, and damaged containers. She asked about orders in progress, seasonal demand, supplier lead times, payroll obligations, lease terms, and the number of weeks required to install a replacement press. Tarek followed, increasingly irritated. "You are counting objects." "Yes. You said this would restore my business." "I'm counting the cost of interruption, too." He stopped. "The cost of what?" "The time between yesterday and the day you reopen." Myra turned her tablet toward him. "Property coverage replaces what burned. Business interruption coverage replaces income you lose because it burned. It can cover wages, temporary rent, equipment leasing, relocation, and other necessary expenses. You would pay employees who are not producing anything." "For a while." "Why?" "So they are still your employees when you reopen." Tarek looked toward the production floor. 600 workers had been employed across the district. His company had 38. Most had families. Some would leave Rithais within days if they found no work. He had assumed that was inevitable. Mara studied him. "You never planned for this." "We planned for equipment failures." "You had spares?" "For critical components." "Fire suppression?" "Yes." "Data backups?" "Not enough." "Emergency credit?" 3 months. "That's better than many businesses." "It does not matter." "It matters to underwriting." "I still do not understand why strangers would evaluate my losses." "Because insurers need evidence before they pay." "And if your evidence is wrong?" "You appeal." "And if the appeal fails?" "You sue." Tarek stared. "You built an entire legal process around arguing over misfortune." Myra tucked the ruler into her bag. "We built several." She crouched beside the old seal press. "This one has historical value." "It belonged to my grandmother." "Was it used in production?" "No." "Then replacing it with a modern machine would not restore what you lost." "At last, something we agree on." Mara photographed the manufacturer's plate. "But restoration may be possible." Tarek looked down at her. "You would pay to restore an obsolete machine." "If the policy covered scheduled historic equipment." "Did it?" "You didn't have a policy." The words settled between them. Mara stood. "That's the part I can't fix." Chapter 5. The Price of Risk. The Council's first insurance committee met for 19 days. By the end of the third, everyone hated the humans. The humans considered that encouraging. They brought actuaries. No species on Rithais had a precise equivalent. The closest translation was numerical profit, which the actuaries rejected because it sounded impressive. Dr. Elias Ward, senior risk modeler for the Terran Mutual Exchange, began with probability tables. He explained frequency, severity, correlation, exposure, loss distributions, deductibles, premiums, reserves. He explained why a warehouse made of fireproof composite should cost less to insure than one built from untreated local timber. He explained why a pilot with 20 years of accident-free service paid less than a pilot who had crashed twice, and described both incidents as educational. He explained why some risks were too common to insure cheaply and others too catastrophic to insure alone. Counselor Tal listened for nearly an hour. Then he said, "You charge cautious citizens less." "Yes." "And reckless citizens more." "Yes." "So insurance is not generosity." "No." "Yet you describe it as social protection." "It can be both." "That is contradictory." Elias adjusted his glasses. "Most useful human institutions are." A colonial engineer raised a hand. "Could an insurer require safer construction?" "Yes." "Could it refuse unsafe property?" "Yes." "Then insurers possess authority over building standards." "Influence mostly." "Without law." "With pricing." The engineer looked intrigued. Elias displayed two warehouses. One had automatic fire doors, separated storage zones, current wiring, redundant suppression pumps, and quarterly inspection records. The other had none of those things. The first warehouse is less likely to suffer a total loss. Its premium is lower. The second warehouse can improve its systems or pay more. Governor Sellan leaned forward. "So insurance rewards prevention before disaster." "Exactly." "Then why did Representative Holt say it does not stop fires?" "Insurance itself does not, but insurers dislike paying claims. That creates a strong financial interest in fewer fires." Counselor Tal made a sound of disgust. "Your safety culture is motivated by profit." "Sometimes." "Is nothing sacred to humans?" Elias considered the question. "Fire exits." The committee transcript recorded 7 seconds of silence. Then a human clerk laughed loudly enough to be removed from the chamber. By the 9th day, the committee had moved from whether insurance was possible to whether it was desirable. The banking guild opposed it. They argued that insured borrowers would take greater risks because someone else bore the loss. The labor association supported it. They argued that workers should not lose employment because a neighboring merchant stored chemicals badly. The trade houses wanted cargo coverage but opposed regulatory audits. The Colonial Development Office wanted every form of coverage and expected someone else to administer it. The humans warned about moral hazard. The translator rendered the phrase as morality danger. That caused 3 hours of confusion. Elias finally explained. "When people are protected from consequences, they may behave less carefully. Insurance has to preserve incentives. That is why policies include deductibles, exclusions, limits, inspections, and pricing based on behavior." Counselor Tal gave him a triumphant look. "So even you admit protection makes people irresponsible." "Protection without structure can." "Then do not protect them." Elias pointed toward the economic impact report. "Your current structure punishes 600 workers for one failed converter. Is that responsibility?" Tal did not answer. Elias continued. "You already spread risk, you just do it badly." The room stiffened. Governor Sellan said, "Explain that statement." "When a business collapses, creditors raise prices to recover losses. Workers require public assistance. Suppliers charge more because customers may default. Governments collect less tax and spend more on relief. Families absorb unpaid debts. Entire districts decline." He brought up the 1.9 billion credit projection. "The loss spreads whether you design a system or not. Insurance simply spreads it deliberately, before the disaster, under rules everyone understands." For the first time, Counselor Tal looked uncertain. The galaxy had not avoided shared risk. It had merely refused to name it. Chapter 6. The Mutual. No Terran insurer wanted to cover Rithais. Not at first. The colony had no insurance law, no claims court, no certified adjusters, no actuarial data, no reserve requirements, no fraud bureau, no policy standards, and no accepted definition of insurable interest. It did have warehouses built across 4 legal eras. It had atmospheric farms operating with equipment no longer manufactured. It had cargo routes through seasonal ion storms. It had local courts that considered future probability an unreliable basis for present obligation. From an underwriting perspective, Rithais was less a market than a warning. Rebecca Holt proposed a mutual insurer. Governor Selen assumed the translator had failed again. It is owned by the customers, Rebecca explained. The customers own the company that may pay them. Yes. Who receives the profit? The members. Who absorbs the loss? The members. Then they are paying themselves. Collectively. Why not simply save their own money? Because one business cannot easily save enough for a total loss. 10,000 businesses can. Economic Minister Joran studied the proposal. Each member purchases coverage. Yes. Premiums fund claims and reserves. Yes. Excess funds remain within the organization. Yes. And if claims exceed reserves. Reinsurance, capital calls, borrowing, or reduced dividends, depending on the structure. Joran looked almost offended. This is cooperation disguised as accounting. Rebecca smiled. That is a fair description of a surprising amount of civilization. The Rithais Mutual Protection Cooperative began with 312 members. Most joined because Governor Selen offered temporary tax credits. Some joined because human trading partners required coverage. A few joined because they had watched Warehouse Complex 8 burn. The first policies were simple: fire, cargo loss, business interruption, worker injury. The contracts were translated into 6 legal languages and 1 trade language. Every translation produced different arguments. The clause concerning acts of war consumed 4 days. The clause concerning vermin consumed 6, because Rithais law classified 3 common pests as protected pollinators. Terk Mal attended every meeting. His company had not yet failed. Human emergency lenders had provided temporary capital against expected reconstruction grants. Mara Singh helped him document equipment losses even though no policy existed. A Terran manufacturer offered leased machinery. His employees worked from 3 borrowed workshops across the city. Terk hated the arrangement. It was inefficient, crowded, temporary, humiliating. It was also keeping 38 people employed. At the Mutual's founding assembly, Terk was elected to the board. He tried to refuse. Rebecca said, "You understand what happens without it." So do 41 other merchants. They're on committees. That is not an argument. No, it's insurance. He stared at her. You have begun using the word as a joke. Only when the paperwork gets bad. The first official member was a bakery. The second was a cargo hauler. The third operated a medical laboratory. The fourth was Terk Mal Industrial Seals. When he signed, Terk read the premium 3 times. He looked at Rebecca. This is a large payment. Yes. If no disaster occurs, I receive nothing. You receive a year in which no disaster occurred. That is not provided by the policy. No, but you may appreciate it more. Terk signed anyway. Chapter 7. The first payout. The first claim did not involve fire. It involved a roof. 6 months after the Mutual opened, a pressure storm crossed the southern plateau and tore the upper panels from Darren agricultural supply. Rain entered the building. 30% of the stored grain seed was ruined. Owner Nell Darren submitted a claim before the storm had ended. The Mutual dispatched an adjuster, an agricultural specialist, and a structural inspector. The claim was approved in 43 hours. Payment followed the next morning. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the point. Darren Agricultural rented temporary storage, replaced the damaged seed, repaired the roof, and reopened after 9 days. Its 14 employees received full wages. Farmers received their planting orders on schedule. The district did not experience a seed shortage. The banks did not record a default. The government did not issue emergency food projections. Most citizens never heard about it. Governor Selen did. He asked Joran for the counterfactual. The economic minister provided 2 pages. Without insurance, Darren Agricultural would have liquidated remaining inventory to pay creditors. 3 farms would have delayed planting. 1 would likely have failed. Estimated secondary impact, 11.4 million credits. The claim had cost $620,000. Selen read the report twice. Then he visited the store. Nell Darren stood beneath a new roof section, directing workers as they unloaded replacement seed. Selen looked around. This is all. Nell glanced up. What were you expecting? Ceremony. For a roof. For survival. Nell considered that. My employees held a small meal. I was not invited. You are the governor. That has not prevented invitations before. This was a good meal. Selin accepted the rebuke. He walked through the repaired building. Fresh panels covered the damaged section. New drainage channels had been added. The electrical system had been raised above the floor. Were those required? He asked. The insurer paid for equivalent repairs. We paid the difference for improvements. Why? Nell pointed to a notice fixed beside the office door. Rithai's Mutual Risk Improvement Credit. Lower premium next year. Selin read the inspection recommendations. Roof anchors, flood barriers, elevated power conduits, inventory separation, emergency moisture covers. The insurer had paid for the loss, then it had made the next loss less likely. On the way out, Selin noticed a small metal plate attached near the entrance. Inspected, documented, protected. Below it was the date. Humans had placed such labels everywhere since arriving on Rithais. Selin had once thought them decorative. Now he understood. The plate did not promise that nothing would happen. It promised that what happened would not be ignored. Chapter 8. The Argument Against Mercy. Insurance spread across the colony faster than expected. Within 2 years, 70% of registered businesses carried at least basic property coverage. Banks offered lower interest rates to insured borrowers. Landlords required liability policies. Cargo contracts specified transit coverage. Construction guilds adopted insurer-approved standards. The number of total loss fires fell by 31%. Then the fraud began. It was not sophisticated. A shipping merchant named Oven Pell reported a cargo theft. Investigators found the cargo hidden in a family warehouse. A workshop owner exaggerated the value of damaged tools. A restaurant submitted the same refrigeration loss to 2 insurers. The opposition seized on every case. Counselor Ivan Tal called an emergency hearing. He had never stopped opposing the system. Now he had evidence. Insurance creates criminals, he declared. Rebecca Holt sat at the witness table. No. Money creates criminals. Insurance gives them forms. Tal did not appreciate that. You promised stability. We built stability. You built fraud. We built investigators, too. Tal displayed the 3 cases. Citizens now burn property for payment. One attempted to. Workers fake injuries. Some do. Businesses inflate losses. Yes. And honest members pay for it. Yes. The chamber murmured. Rebecca leaned toward the microphone. That is why fraud is prosecuted. But prevention failed. Prevention often fails. Then the system has failed. Rebecca looked tired. For 3 years, she had explained the same human idea from different directions. This time, she did not reach for charts. Counselor, how many thefts occurred before insurance? Tal hesitated. That is irrelevant. How many false invoices? Not relevant. How many merchants hid assets during bankruptcy? The hearing concerns insurance fraud. The hearing concerns whether human institutions are invalid because humans, or anyone else, can abuse them. She opened the case file. Oven Pell was caught because the insurer compared cargo scans, port records, family property registrations, and warehouse energy use. The workshop owner was caught because the adjuster recognized equipment that did not exist. The restaurant claim was caught because insurers share a claims registry. Tal folded his hands. So surveillance is the price of your protection. Documentation is. You have an answer for every flaw. No, we have procedures for them. That is the same thing. It really is. Tal stood. Insurance weakens character. It teaches citizens that loss is someone else's burden. Rebecca stared at him. Then she said, after Warehouse 8 burned, did the colony bear no burden? Tal did not answer. Did unemployment stay inside the property line? Did defaults stop at the door? Did grief remain private? Did suppliers avoid loss because they had not caused the fire? The chamber was silent. Loss is always someone else's burden eventually, Rebecca said. Insurance decides whether that burden arrives as a planned contribution or as wreckage. Tal's voice softened. And mercy. Rebecca looked toward the gallery, where Terk Mal sat beside several business owners. Mercy is what we call it when we remember the numbers belong to people. Chapter 9. The Year of Three Disasters. The Mutual's first true test came in its fourth year. The season began with drought. Rithais relied on atmospheric condensers to support agriculture across the Central Plains. When the upper air currents shifted, water production fell 18% below projection. Crop insurers began issuing partial payments. Then a cargo carrier struck debris in orbit. The vessel survived. Its cargo did not. 14 insured shipments were declared total losses. 2 weeks later, an underground coolant line ruptured beneath the North Industrial District. 37 buildings closed. 11 required major repair. Any one of the events would have been manageable. Together, they threatened the Mutual's reserves. Board members gathered in the operations room before dawn. Terk Mal arrived first. The years since the warehouse fire had changed him. His company occupied a new facility built of segmented fireproof bays. Every machine was documented. Data backups existed in 3 locations. Employees performed evacuation drills twice a year and complained about them with increasing creativity. Terk now served as chair of the Mutual's Claims Committee. He entered the room carrying coffee. Humans had infected him with several habits. Rebecca stood beside the reserve display. "We can pay all valid claims," she said. "For how long?" Terk asked. "Assuming current estimates, 63 days. And after, we draw on reinsurance. The reinsurer disputes the agricultural trigger." "Of course they do. Can we compel payment?" "Eventually." "Eventually does not plant crops." "No." Board member Yara Sen studied the figures. "Delay the industrial claims." Terk shook his head. "Those businesses will fail." "Prioritize agriculture." "Then the industrial workers lose wages." "Reduce all payments proportionally." "Contracts require full payment." "Contracts do not create money." Rebecca listened without interrupting. When the room quieted, she said, "We activate the catastrophe plan." Terk looked at her. "We have never activated it." "That is why it exists." The plan had been written during the Mutual's first year and revised annually. It contained credit lines negotiated in advance. Emergency authority for interim payments. Agreements with banks to pause loan collections. Shared adjuster pools. Government loan guarantees, pre-approved contractors, a communication schedule, a dispute process, a list of people authorized to make decisions if half the board was unavailable. At the time, several counselors had called it excessive. Now every page mattered. Rebecca assigned teams. Terk coordinated industrial claims. Yara handled agriculture. Bank representatives joined within the hour. The governor authorized temporary guarantees before breakfast. Human insurers on 3 neighboring worlds dispatched adjusters. Reinsurers received formal notices, evidence packages, and a legal reminder that Rithais had adopted Terran standard catastrophe clauses. The system moved, not elegantly, not calmly, but it moved. Payments reached farmers before planting deadlines. Industrial workers received temporary wage support. Banks suspended collections automatically. Contractors repaired coolant systems according to a priority list created months earlier. When the reinsurer continued disputing liability, the Mutual borrowed against expected recovery and filed arbitration. Counselor Tal appeared at the operations room on the 4th day. He found Terk asleep at a table with his head beside a stack of claim summaries. Rebecca was arguing with a contractor. 3 adjusters were comparing satellite maps. A human volunteer had taped a sign above the coffee station. "Morale reserve." Tal stood near the doorway. "No one asked me to come," he said. Rebecca looked up. "Then this is either generous or ominous." "I want to observe." "Grab a chair." He watched for 6 hours. No one discussed mercy. They discussed moisture indexes, repair estimates, contract wording, wage records, and reserve ratios. No one gave speeches. They made calls. They checked forms. They corrected errors. They argued. They apologized. They kept the promises written years earlier to people they had never expected to meet under circumstances they had hoped would never occur. Before leaving, Tal stopped beside Terk. "You are paying claims before reimbursement is certain." "Yes." "That could destroy the Mutual." "Yes." "Why do it?" Terk rubbed his eyes. "Because the members paid us when their own reimbursement was uncertain." Tal frowned. Terk pointed at the rows of claim files. They paid premiums for 4 years without knowing whether they would ever need us. Now they need us. The counselor looked across the room. For the first time, he saw the institution not as a pool of money, but as a promise moving through time. Chapter 10. The fire again. The second warehouse fire began at 02:17 on a winter morning. This time, the alarm reached dispatch in 4 seconds. Automatic doors sealed the affected bay. Suppression systems activated in 6. The first municipal crew arrived in 5 minutes. Volunteer crews followed in 11. The fire destroyed one section of the new Eastern Logistics Center. It did not spread. By sunrise, the building stood blackened but intact. 23 businesses operated inside. All were insured. By noon, adjusters had established a temporary claims office in the parking area. By evening, every business had received an emergency payment. Within 3 days, temporary warehouse space was assigned. Within 19 businesses had resumed partial operations. The remaining 4 reopened within a month. Governor Selen visited the site during reconstruction. He found Terk beside a newly installed fire door. Mara Singh stood with him, older now, still carrying the same folding ruler. Selen looked at the damage. Smaller than Warehouse 8. Because of the compartment walls, Mara said. Required by the insurer. Required by building code. Which adopted the insurer standard. Yes. Selen ran a hand across the edge of the new door. Did insurance stop this fire? Mara smiled, not directly. Terk said, that is how humans answer when the honest answer is yes. Mara objected. Insurance paid for the modeling that changed the code, discounted buildings that installed the doors early, and funded the inspection program. The fire department stopped the fire, using the water connection required by the same standard. That does complicate the answer. Selen looked toward the temporary claims office. Merchants moved in and out carrying documents. No one sat on the curb staring at the end of a life. The fire had still been frightening. Machines had still burned. Orders had still been lost. People were angry, tired, and inconvenienced, but they were not ruined. Selen remembered the first morning, 42 businesses disappearing before lunch. He had believed the damage was permanent because all experience told him it was. The humans had not promised to prevent disaster. They had done something stranger. They had refused to let disaster decide what happened next. Chapter 11. The export. Rithais did not keep insurance to itself. No human invention remained local once aliens discovered it could be turned into a committee. The first delegation came from the ocean world of Malith, where storm losses regularly erased coastal settlements. The second came from Vara Station, which wanted cargo coverage but rejected health insurance as economically irrational. The third came from the Hellion Combine, whose representatives spent 2 weeks insisting their species had no concept of uncertainty. Their ship was delayed by an engine fault on departure. The Rithais Mutual trained adjusters, regulators, inspectors, actuaries, claims advocates, and fraud investigators. It exported policy templates, reserve models, inspection protocols, dispute systems. It also exported arguments. Every world objected to premiums. Every world objected to exclusions. Every world believed its risks were unique. Every world eventually discovered that fire, flood, injury, theft, illness, collision, and bad judgment did not respect cultural exceptionalism. The Council established an interstellar solvency framework. Reinsurance markets linked dozens of worlds. Shared catastrophe funds formed around trade routes and planetary regions. Insurers financed safer ports because destroyed ports produced expensive claims. They funded medical prevention because untreated illness cost more. They required redundant life support systems on passenger vessels. They refused to cover buildings without evacuation routes. At first, governments accused them of overreach. Then casualty rates fell. Insurance became ordinary. That was the final stage of every successful human idea. First it was absurd, then controversial, then complicated, then invisible. 50 years after Warehouse 8, a young trade student toured the Human Archive exhibit on Rithais. She stopped before the preserved seal press. The machine had been restored. Its metal frame remained scarred by heat. A small plate explained that it had belonged to the Mall family and survived the fire that introduced insurance to the wider galaxy. The student read the description twice. Then she turned to the archive guide. I do not understand. The guide smiled. Which part? The galaxy did not have insurance. No. What happened when someone lost a home? They lost the home. A business. The business failed. A ship. Whoever owned it absorbed the loss. A worker was injured. The worker's family usually carried the cost. The student's face tightened. That is barbaric. The guide looked toward the old machine. At the time, it was considered responsibility. The student read the plaque again. The final paragraph quoted Governor Selin Vey's address to the council after the second warehouse fire. The guide knew the words by memory. The student read them aloud. We once believed loss proved who was strong enough to continue. Humanity taught us that strength was not measured by how many survived ruin alone. It was measured by how carefully a civilization arranged that no one had to. The student stood quietly. Around her, the museum held fragments of ordinary human history. A fire inspection tag, a claims form, an actuarial table, a faded photograph of workers standing beneath a company emblem. Objects that would once have seemed too dull to preserve. The human archive preserved them anyway. Civilizations remembered their wars because wars were loud. They remembered their monuments because monuments were large. But sometimes the most important moment in history was a merchant signing a contract and paying for something he hoped never to use. The galaxy had invented faster engines, stronger alloys, longer lives. It had crossed the dark between stars. It had mapped worlds and moved oceans and built cities beneath alien suns. But until humanity arrived, it had never invented a way for the fortunate to prepare for the misfortune of strangers. The galaxy had understood survival. Humanity taught it recovery. Archive note. Modern interstellar law recognizes insurance as foundational civil infrastructure. The original Rithai's Mutual Protection Cooperative still operates. Its oldest active policy belongs to Terk Mal Industrial Seals. The company has filed 7 claims in 112 years. It has paid premiums every year. Its current owner considers this a good bargain.